Two, hello, check. Two. Check two. Two, hello, chat, are you there? Chat, are you with me? There's no new intro.
Count on me and have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Happy birthday, John Cougar Mellencamp.
Happy birthday to music legend John Cougar Mellencamp. The #1 anniversary that we're going to be celebrating today and every day. Squatch, and thank you very much for 42 months resub at tier 2, Squatch. I really appreciate all of the support. Thank you so much. Once again, happy birthday to John Cougar Mellencamp. He wrote a little song about Jack and Diane, which we all remember. It was my birthday last week. Can I get a happy birthday? Of course, Joe 110. Happy birthday. How old are you? What's the damage? $29. Wow, okay. Gonna throw that around, huh? A little inconsiderate, honestly, for you to talk about how you're 29 years old when you're on this stream. In this chat. I'm old AF. Too old to be using the abbreviation AF. Absolutely, Spaceman. I'm completely agree. But as I've talked about a number of times, that is why I think it's good for us oldies to say things like AF and FR and skibbity and whatever it is. I think we need to reclaim these Gen Z slang terms right away and we instantly make them uncool. The wizened and mature Big 2-9. Man, I was so not wise or mature at the age of 29. And still I'm not. That's the real wisdom that you get. That's the real wisdom. Still not mature. Oh, and Rob is a zoomer. Yes, that's exactly right. Blurp hello. As an elder millennial, I find it insulting whenever anyone is younger than me. It's a little rude. Like, let's call it what it is. It's a little rude. Sorry, I don't have the...
Don't forget Riz PAUSERS.
Useless. Thank you for the 33 months. Exactly. We got lots of Riz over here. We got Riz, and that's no cap. I feel like the genocide aged me a decade. Where were y'all when you were 29, chat? I was in this transition period, Jay, from, I was in the musician for a long time, and I quit the music business, and I got a real job in advertising, which I've talked about a little bit on this show before, that made me extremely miserable. And I tried to transition into being like a stable, like normal adult at the age of 29, and as you can see from my career here on Twitch.tv, that went really well. That just went swimmingly. Now I'm here at age 41 on Twitch.tv every single day trying to make a little number go up. Bottom of the screen. That's how well my transition into mature adulthood went. At 29, I'm still working on my first... It's my partner's birthday today as well. They're out in the woods alone having an existential day of self-realization. Well, that sounds nice. I love that for them. I was working a horrible corporate job for a big company. Now I do the same, but for a smaller company. Yeah, I was working a job that I hated in advertising. And now I'm a Twitch subscription salesman for the Twitch/Amazon Corporation. And every single day I log on with no salary or benefits or anything to speak of. I log onto this website and I try to sell Twitch subscriptions. That's what I do each and every day. Ice. The Diet Coke with ice. Sometimes you really want to class it up, you know? When you really want to class up the proceedings, you have that Diet Coke with ice. You have us as friends, though, and isn't that better than money or other necessities? Yes, yeah. No, it's better. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's better. On the rocks, Joey. Anyway, I'm coming at you, obviously, from the exact same time that I always log on. From the same location as well, as you can see. And there's a lot to get into today. I'm going to take a moment to get my brain to wake up here, since I'm starting so early. Barbara, thanks for the 18 months of Tier 1. Really appreciate it. So if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to need to take a couple moments here to get things rolling here. But there's much to discuss today, chat. Much to discuss. Oh, the alerts are so low I can barely hear them. Yeah, okay. I've got some... I've got some interesting audio situations happening here. When this song plays out, I'm going to cut the music. First time I've been able to catch a stream in a couple months. Are these the new digs? Nope. Nope. No new digs. Just the same stream as always, Barbara. Interesting audio situations always happen when you're in the same room. I mean, sometimes just the settings are different, you know, and it's like a little audio settings gremlin has been in here, fiddling around with all the knobs and everything. Same place as always. Please stop asking. And Jay, I think your suggestion of going as Cool Jay is okay. It's just your imagination, Squatch. That's right. That is absolutely correct. Let's not worry about it. Anyway, how was your weekend, chat? Did you have a nice weekend? Let's hear about your weekend. Let's get the ball rolling here. I'm going to turn up the desktop audio. That should fix the alert situation. Where's the Lennon bust at? Must have gotten moved to another shelf. I understand. Yeah, it's just sometimes you like to move it around, you know? Extremely chill, and I called out of work because of insomnia, so the chill continues. You know, if you're not sleeping, John, what use are you going to be at work? What use are you going to be? It's been over 95 degrees every day, and I have no air conditioning. Thank you, babe. You know, one realization that has set in is now, like, you know, summer extends into like August now, or extends like it used to be like the end of August to be the end of summer, and now it's like late September, early October. It's just shifted now, and I've had a dawning realization that the AC in my car does not work. I've had to kind of like accept this. I was like, maybe it's working. I would like blast it, and I'd be like putting my hand in front of it. It's like it feels kind of cold, but it's like if you have to say it feels kind of cold, I think that's an indication that it just doesn't work. And it's fine for now, but I think when we get into next summer, it's going to be something that I'm going to have to reckon with. How expensive can that be, though? Is that like $50 to fix? I think it should be fine. Might just need a recharge. Okay, well that would be nice if that's all it was. Took vacation time for the first time in a long time. Son turned 11 and had a great birthday and fun get together. Made zero improvements around the house and started zins again after a 2-year hiatus. Things are okay as things go. That sounds all right, Barbara. Sounds all right. What did I do on Friday? I hung out with my son. We had Pizza Hut as always, and we watched Paranorman. Paranorman, which is really good. He really enjoyed that. Started Zins. Is anyone else on the Zins? I really need to get some bullshit lights back here. Obviously, I have them, and they're just not turned on right now. I think that's going to really improve this whole my bullshit by streamer lighting. What's that movie about? It's like this stop motion animated movie about this kid in this small town that like he has these visions of ghosts, and there's some kind of something about a witch's curse that happens, and there's zombies show up, and the kid and his friends and the school bully and his big sister and his friends like himbo older brother have to go on a quest to fight all the monsters and everything. It's good. Eve be like, I'm into original Zin. Okay, there we go. Now we're really cooking with gas here. The bully is McLovin. Yeah, right. There's so many new and exciting ways to ingest nicotine now. Zins and the vapes and stuff. And I'm just not into anything. As I've said before a number of times, I've tried to start smoking. I've tried a number of times to start smoking because smoking is objectively very cool. It's never taken. So I don't have this nicotine addiction, so I don't need to vape or anything like that or use Zins. Or pouches. Yeah, you got dip and snuff. Try harder. I know. I've tried to get addicted to this stuff a number of times. It's just never taken. If Zin was just a caffeine thing, I could get behind that. Gotta try South American smokes with clicky capsules of flavor. That sounds nice. I tried it as well. I hated how my hands stank after blasting a cig. I just like. Have you tried starting hot turkey? There we go. There we go. My thing with smoking that I don't understand is it's just like it always made me feel so ill, like physically ill. Like it drains all the color from my face. I turn green. I want to puke. My head is spinning. Like, is that how it's supposed to make you feel? Like, is that how it's supposed to happen? This is what I don't get. I talk about this with smokers sometimes, and then they're like, "Yeah, that's what it is." And I'm like, there's like a disconnect with me. I just don't really get it. I felt that way every time for 25 years. Spaceman J, I don't know. I just don't get it for me. I think it seems like it's good that you quit. I don't want to say like, oh, it's great that you're doing. It smells bad. Yeah, I remember I used to go out like in Montreal in bars in the early 2000s, and I would just come back and like All my clothes would be smelling like cigarette smoke, and my hair. It's just you'd smell like this like sweaty cigarette thing concoction. Wasn't that crazy that you used to go to bars and restaurants and people would just be blasting cigs the whole time? What was with that? It's crazy that that happened until like quite recently. I don't miss that either. And I remember like when they were passing those smoking bans, people were like, "No, it's never gonna happen." People, it was just unfathomable. It was just completely unfathomable to people.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
6 months baby.
Ripping buds, bud. We called them darts. I don't know if that was just like an Eastern Ontario thing, if that's a more widespread thing. Chris, thank you for the 6 months. 6 months, we got it. We made it. Those glass ashtrays they had at BP's in like the McDonald Playland with all the kids running around. Yeah, the smoking or non-smoking section, which are just right next to each other and with no separation. When my neighbor smokes on his back porch, there's some kind of wind tunnel magic curse that pulls it straight into my living room. The doors open. It's so gross. I'll notice it like if I'm driving around. If I drive past someone on the street smoking a cigarette, and I'll smell it like in my car. Insane. Fucking ripping darts, bud. I think it's good that we move past this as a society. If you're still a smoker, no judgment, obviously. No judgment over here, but I think it's probably a good thing that we move past this. In the US, we call darts the things that are pointy needle with feathers in the other. Throw them at a corkboard. I don't know why you'd call a cigarette that. I don't know. I mean, we have darts in Canada as well. That is a thing. I haven't smoked in a decade, but I've been having the worst cravings to start again. I mean, that's what I mean. It's like I think smoking is quite disgusting, but going like this, that's great. I get it. I get the appeal, and I'm sympathetic to that. As a long time weed guy, not really been doing that lately, but a long time weed guy. My doctor buddy calls them chest X-rays because of the comparable increase in cancer risk with each dose. How many chest X-rays are you supposed to have in a year? That really drives it home, doesn't it? Really takes the romanticism out of it. They're indeed cool, but they're not for me. I mean, that's just the way it goes. When I was a child, my dad used to drive me to this apartment in Copenhagen that worked as a distribution central for socialist literature in Scandinavia. Your dad seems so cool, Diego. And I remember there being shelves with books and periodicals everywhere and some really nice American Underground comic books. Literally everyone who stayed there smoked nonstop, so there was a haze of smoke hanging below the ceiling, and I stunk of cigarettes when we got home. I mean, your dad seems cool for his political leanings and background, Diego, but maybe less so for dragging you into a smoke filled, cancer causing situation. Oh, that was nice. Worked retail for years, so I just kept smoking at breaks. I mean, that seems like a big part of it too. If you work in restaurants or retail or whatever, the smokers just have automatic breaks built in. I guess I'll start smoking then. Retail and restaurants, they're incentivized to smoke. I thought it was normal to feel like I'm going to pass out 3 times a day. I don't think it is normal. I don't think you want that. I want to have that. Did you see the article about all the fascists and Nazis listed on the Victims of Communism Monument in Ottawa? I did see it, yeah, from David Pugliese, who's one of the only decent, like, mainstream journalists in this country talking about this kind of thing. Are you speaking to us through a paper cup with a string? No, I'm on a really good mic, which is like a Yeti mic, but it's because I'm slightly farther away. I'm used to talking like you. Usually, when I talk in the podcast and on streaming, I'm talking right into the mic like this. I'm talking right into it like this, and now I'm going back here, and I feel like it's just not quite the same. Better like that? I don't know if there's a way for me to do that. Miles better. I just don't know if there's a way for me to do that, though. You don't want the mic in the shot? It's more of a space thing. It's a space situation. Yeah, I can't do the whole stream like this. Hello, chat. Hello. Lean on that mic, brother. We want that soft, buttery voice. That's what the people come here for. I can't do this the entire time, though, chat. I can't do this. This is not appealing. I will figure this out, okay? I will figure out the audio issues in the exact same location that I'm always streaming from. Okay? Let's not worry about it right now. Anyway. What else do we got? It's just a normal day. It's a normal day over here. It's John Mellencamp's birthday. Also, apparently, Tom York of radio. Maybe we should just spend the entire day reminiscing about what the music of John Cougar Mellencamp means to each and every one of us. Normal day, normal time, normal location. I need about another 10 minutes or so, and then I think we can talk about serious business. Oh, Noam Chomsky. ¿Cómo está? Life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. Great Mellencamp line. I love the weird, when Weird Al was on The Simpsons, he did a cover of that as well. The credits go on long after the viewer's interest is gone. The Dodgers got stomped in the playoffs yesterday, and their trashy fans started throwing things on the field and leaving the game, so that was satisfying. That's nice. I saw there was that big Mets comeback win. I saw Mets people were happy. That's exciting. I feel like the Mets situation is just like a fan base that's like they're just setting themselves up for even though it feels like they're doing something good is happening, they're just setting themselves up for even more disappointment. Why do so many lefties like the Mets? I'm not sure. I'm not really a baseball guy. I'm not really a baseball guy, so I'm not sure. In fact, I've been trying to be more of a football guy. Last year was my first year being like a football guy, and then I have not watched a game so far this year. So it might have just been a brief dalliance. When over half the names on your memorial are Nazis, maybe perhaps it's a Nazi monument. Actually, I mean, okay, so yeah, we moved off that very quickly, but I think it's an important point. Like in like just by definitionally, your victims of communism memorial is a fascist memorial. That's what anti-communism is, right? So no, it's not surprising. It's not surprising that these names on this memorial are fascists because like that's what anti-communism is. Those were the primary victims of fascism or the primary victims of communism. So no, it's not surprising. 330 out of 500. I didn't even think I had looked like into the actual numbers here. We can look at this article. Like, what the fuck do they expect? Is this monument even ever going to be finished? This like ugly fucking fascist monument. It's so on brand for Canada, isn't it? It's so on brand for Canada with our whole history of like of importing Nazis after World War II, our whole like Ukrainian diaspora, which we've talked about a lot, the fascist monuments that are involved in that. And then we're building this Victims of Communism Foundation monument that's just an ode to fascism. Like, what did people think were going to happen? Victims of Communism Memorial faces call to remove over 330 names linked to Nazis and fascists. The memorial was supposed to be unveiled in November 2023. That was put on hold after questions surfaced about many of the names listed. Like, it's all, none of this is a coincidence, right? The Ukrainian Galician SS division monuments, the Hunka situation in Parliament when they applauded him, you know, the big beaming applause line. Now this is our culture. This is our culture, and according to the incredibly dumb fascists in this country now, uh, uh, this legacy of fascism and Tim Hortons and Canadian Tire. This is what makes up Canadian culture. Not to mention the Nazis copying our homework in the first place. That's right, being one of the primary inspirations for Nazism in the first place. Probably worth mentioning that as well. Have you seen all these posts now? All these people that are just like, this is their primary concern is like, we got to boycott Tim Hortons and Canadian Tire because this is my entire conception of what our culture is in this fucking country. Or is a shitty coffee chain and like a hardware store, and now there's too many brown people in there, and they're just like so upset. Their entire perception of what it means to be Canadian has been completely turned on its head now. Victims of Communism Memorial faces call to remove over 330 names linked to Nazis and fascists. The memorial was supposed to be unveiled in November 2023. That was put on hold after questions surfaced about many of the names listed. Look at this ugly piece of shit as well. This is the monument that's causing such a stir. Just dynamite this thing already and be done with it. Please. What are we doing here? It even looks like a fascist monument. The Department of Canadian Heritage. And again, this should be obvious with anyone with like even a passing knowledge of history, right? The Department of Canadian Heritage is being told that more than half of the 550 names on the memorial to the victims of communism. I thought communism killed like 80 bajillion people. You got 550 names on there and half of them are Nazis? Really? Why only 550 names? I thought there was like millions and millions and millions and millions of people. 20 million people in Russia, you know? 50 bajillion people around the world, in China and elsewhere. You're telling me all we could come up with is 550 people and half of them are Nazis? I'm sure Canadian Heritage incorporates indigenous histories. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Being told that more than half of the 550 names on the memorial to the victims of communism to be removed because of potential links to the Nazis or questions about affiliations with fascist groups, according to government records. As originally planned, there were to be 553 entries on the Ottawa Memorial's Wall of Remembrance. The department had determined that 50 to 60 of the names or organizations were likely directly linked to the Nazis, according to the documents obtained by the Ottawa Citizen through an access to information request. A 2023 report for Canadian Heritage recommended more than 330 names be excluded to be on the safe side. The exclusions were recommended because of the lack of information about the individuals or organizations and whether they have links to fascist organizations or the Nazis. Some of the entries could also be removed because they have no direct link to Canada. So what is the purpose of this, then? What is the purpose of having this? The memorial, which is located near the corner of Wellington and Bay Streets, is supposed to honor those who suffered under communism. But concerns have been raised over the years by Jewish organizations and historians that names of Eastern Europeans who collaborated with the Nazis in the Holocaust have been put forward in an attempt to whitewash their past. You think so? That's crazy that happened. I think what's frustrating to me about this story is like this whole narrative about let's talk about this. Like, well, we're gonna get into talking about October 7th, obviously, but like since we're kind of getting warmed up on something here. What's frustrating about this is that this whole storyline about Canada's link to fascism, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly through the Ukrainian diaspora and like the Ukrainian immigrants that came to this country following World War II, this is not a new story. As we've talked about on this stream endlessly. Like, there was a massive inquiry into this in the 80s. Like, this is not a new situation. And the fact that we're approving like this kind of monument now, the fact that they're applauding people like Hunka now, the fact that there's stories coming out recently like what's this monument to the Galician SS division doing in this Ukrainian cemetery? How strange. Like, it's just weird that we keep getting stories like this when this has been like an open secret for decades. Ukrainian heritage Nazis in Canada not beating the allegations. Like, why are we approving these kinds of monuments, given the history that we know of? That's why it was so absurd, like seeing Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, of all people, who knows full well about this, considering it's her grandparents' life work. Her grandfather, Michael Chomiak, the fascist collaborator, considering it's his life work. They're beaming and applauding this Nazi guy after the Speaker of the House says he fought the Russians during World War II. And everyone's there applauding. And then after they like plead ignorance, oh, what? We just had no idea. Like, the idea that they just don't know about this stuff is so preposterous on its face, considering how old this story is. We've been talking about this for now 30 fucking years, at least, in Canada. This is just Russian propaganda, that's right. The thing about this Russian propaganda is it seems to be accurate a lot of the time. This is what the thing that no one wants to admit. No one that's obsessed with this kind of Russian propaganda that wants to admit that a lot of the time this propaganda seems to be based in reality. It kind of complicates some of these narratives. How could she be a fascist? Her last name is literally Freeland, exactly. That's just what's, I appreciate that people like Pugliese are putting out these kinds of articles, and there was the big outcry over the Hunka applause situation a couple months back, but it's just, that's the frustrating thing when, like, we've been following this story, the fact that you learn about how old this story is. We've watched CBC clips from the 80s about Canada's link to fascism through these Ukrainian immigrants, and we're still doing this. We're still being like, yes, let's spend millions of dollars on this Victims of Communism Memorial. And then when these stories start to come out, we're just shocked and appalled. We're just so shocked and appalled that this has happened. Like, what more needs to happen until people realize that there's this link between this country and the some of the immigrants that came here following the war. How does Puglisi still have a job? I actually don't know. I think it's genuinely surprising that he's allowed to write any of this stuff in the Ottawa Citizen. Maybe he has compromat on somebody. I'm convinced the only reason we opposed Nazi Germany was because they invaded France. Yeah, as we've talked about a number of times, PM Trio, like Canada and the United States were we didn't care about the Nazis. We've talked before, and this is in Tyler Shipley's really excellent book, Canada and the World, talks about William Lyon Mackenzie King meeting with Hitler, and you can look in William Lyon Mackenzie King's diary, and he's just like, this guy's fantastic. We love this guy. And we're turning away boatloads of Jewish refugees during the war. We didn't give a shit about fascism or the Nazis. Well, nor did America. It was when they started threatening the global hegemony of what was the British Empire at the time. That's when we started to be concerned about, Nazism. The rich folks were very into it. Yeah, look at all these big Ford in Henry Ford in the United States and Walt Disney and all these people. They're more than they've loved these guys. They thought they were fantastic. Really, you're killing communists and persecuting Jewish people who we don't give a shit about? Fantastic, no problem. Keep it up. And as soon as they threatened the global hegemony of the British Empire, that's when it became a problem. The Bush family, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this endlessly, on this show. But I guess that's why I find it frustrating, these stories that are coming out now about this monument. And people acting like it's this big surprise. If the Nazis hadn't invaded the West, they would have been left to do all the Holocaust they wanted. I mean, look at what we're allowed. Look at what we're not even allowing, but helping Israel do for right now for the last year. This whole idea that we ever cared about human rights or genocide or any of this stuff has been completely, for whatever anyone believed that in the kind of post-war propaganda about Canada or the United States, whoever actually believed that should at least maybe reevaluate that now. Obviously, we don't actually care about those things. The memorial, let's just go back to this. The memorial was supposed to be unveiled in November 2023. That was put on hold after members of parliament honored Yaroslav Hunka, a Ukrainian soldier with the Waffen-SS Galicia Division, a voluntary unit that was under the command of the Nazis. That incident became an international embarrassment for Canada. Canadian Heritage spokesperson Caroline Zajkowski told the Ottawa Citizen that a new date for the memorial unveiling had not yet been set. What a fucking waste this is. Now it's just going to sit there. They spent millions of dollars on this thing. It's probably just going to sit there forever. Or like a tarp. There's your monument to your anti-communist monument. Just this big thing under a tarp that just sits there endlessly. Because they found out too late that it's glorifying fascism. Asked whether the more than 330 entries on the Wall of Remembrance will be removed, Jaskowski replied, "The review of the commemorative elements is ongoing." The main spokesperson for Tribute to Liberty, the organization which advocated for the memorial, did not respond to a request for comment. Tribute to Liberty, that doesn't sound sinister at all either. Tribute to Liberty. In 2021, we discovered that one particular Nazi leader was being honored by the memorial. It took us more than a year of very active advocacy efforts before the name was finally removed. We told officials repeatedly that we believed there could be a great number of Nazis being commemorated, but sadly this problem does not appear to be a priority for the department. It is important to note, yeah, you think so? It is important to note that many anti-communist and anti-Soviet advocates and fighters were also active Nazi collaborators, you don't say, who committed documented massacres. Global Affairs Canada officials warned their counterparts at Canadian Heritage in 2021. Private donations had already been made to the monument in the names of Nazi collaborators, the CBC reported in July 21. These included Roman Shikoyevich, a Ukrainian nationalist and Nazi collaborator, as well as Ante Pavelic, who ran a Nazi puppet regime in Croatia and is considered the chief perpetrator of the Holocaust in the Balkans. What an absolute debacle. The memorial to the victims of communism has already been the focus of multiple controversies over its exact purpose, location, size, and cost over the last 15 years. The price tag for this project has ballooned to an estimated $7.5 million, including $6 million in public funds. From an original budget of $1.5 million that was supposed to be funded entirely through private donations from Tribute to Liberty. I wonder what you can probably look into this Tribute to Liberty organization and find some interesting things there, I could imagine. What an absolute disaster. No one could have predicted that this would be a bad use of public funds. Just insane. Nice money laundering scheme you got there. Yeah, don't worry, bro. We're gonna fund the whole thing through private donations. Don't worry. Gonna be endlessly painted if they ever unveil it. Yeah, it's like, what could they even do at this point? Just like scrape all the names off of there and just have it as this like basic like art installation? Croatian diaspora is pretty fascistic too, often overlooked. It seems like a common element to a lot of these different diasporas. Just cover the names in duct tape, yeah. Just again, like we've looked at CBC coverage of this link to fascism from the 80s. There was a big inquiry about this in the 1980s under the Mulroney government. Weirdly, the far right of each diaspora got raised up by Western governments. Yeah, who are we bringing into the country after the war? We were making specific laws to put in place so we weren't bringing in any communists. And in fact, as we've talked about a number of times as well, prior to World War II, the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada was really like socialist. I think it's a really interesting fact. One thing that I've learned over the years of like learning about and talking about this stuff was that for years, Canada's largest socialist newspaper was written in Ukrainian. And it's almost like there was this intentionality behind these immigration policies to disrupt this. That's why we should never have like blanket ideas about any kind of diaspora. But this was these were specific policies that were put in place to disrupt this. And the Ukrainian diaspora was warning about this post-World War II. Yeah, like the unions. Because these folks were getting brought into the country to act as a hired muscle for private industry to destroy these unions and destroy these communities. What was that goofy ass show in the US about hunting Nazis? Was it Hunters? Like the one with Al Pacino? Is that what it was called? And I watched that show too. It's kind of interesting, but I think it whitewashes the fact that like there's this weird they joined the RCMP too. Yeah, I don't doubt it. There's this weird kind of like dynamic that plays out in popular media about some of these stories, where a show like Hunters talks about like Operation Paperclip and talks about these like Nazis being brought into the country, and then it acknowledges this basic truth right? About like Werner von Braun and like all these Nazis coming into the United States after the World War II. But then they're like, but there was this like cool multiracial group of like Nazi hunters that went around and rounded up all these people. But it's like that part didn't happen though. The first part did. The first part did happen, and it wasn't just NASA. It was, as we've talked about with like uh, Alan Dulles and the foundation of the CIA. It was like the whole American like intelligence apparatus was infested with these Nazis after World War II, after Operation Sunrise, and NASA and all these different institutions. Yeah, that's what I mean, Wilco. It's a total retelling. So it's like, yeah, we acknowledge the first part. We acknowledge the first part about these Nazis coming into the country, but don't worry. After they got it brought into the country, how did that happen? I don't know. We don't know exactly. But then they got tracked down by this cool group of hunters. But like, no, that part didn't happen. The first part did. The second part did not happen. They just like took over the American national security establishment. Is what happened. I have to find time to read the Devil Chessboard. Honestly, this whole subject, Max, like you read the first like 20 pages of Devil's Chessboard and you're like, oh, it's just like it really spells it out for you right away. Oh, we're the Fourth Reich. Oh, okay, that makes so much sense now. Yeah, Hollywood needs to rewrite the bad ending so we can be the good guys. Yeah, absolutely. You acknowledge the harm that happened in the past, and then you paper over it with this alternate history, this fake good and happy ending. Anyway, it's just an insane story about this mom. Frustrating because of like how old this story is. I mean, the archival footage of Dulles with his fucking pipe MF actually does look like a supervillain. Yeah, I mean, Max, like, that's the thing. When we started talking about this like subject on this show, we talked a lot about Operation Paperclip, but it's Operation Sunrise. That's the key. That's the skeleton key. Like what he was doing at the end of the war was treason. It was basically treason. He was personally out there like organizing his entirely different post-war strategy than what was being advocated for by the FDR faction, which with all the problems that they had themselves, that faction were against the Nazis and wanted the Nazis to be punished and not brought into the intelligence apparatus. He was hiding. Yeah, he was hiding it. It's crazy. It is honestly just the craziest story. And then you have an entire industry of World War II movies where the cigar chomping Americans are fighting the Nazis and beating the Nazis. Anyway, it's honestly a fascinating part of our legacy, and you know Israel is a part of this legacy as well. You know, Israel has allowed has is part of like the retelling of this history. Where can we can pretend that we're so opposed to anti-Semitism, and the only way that that's ever displayed is in our total devotion to everything that Israel does, and our total willingness to allow what Israel to commit whatever horrific crimes that they want to. You know, we completely subsidize Israel, who are the country that acts the most like Nazis now today, while simultaneously using the memory of World War II and the memory and the legacy of the pain and trauma of the Holocaust to justify all their criminality and horrific behavior. Anyway, there's no sense dancing around it. We gotta talk about it, folks. It's October 7th. We gotta talk about it. This is just a lighthearted way to open it. I just saw this, and I don't know. It's Kurt Angle. I believe in the three I's: intensity, integrity. Israel is not a legitimate state. You ever listen to the Bad Hasbara podcast? Yeah, I mean, he came on our show a couple months back. I don't really listen to their podcast enough. I'd be interested in hearing the episode with Naomi Klein, considering she's someone that took a lot of criticism after October 7th. Kind of like trying to write this piece in The Guardian, talking about the crimes of Israel, but also kind of like really sharing a lot of the very same propaganda that led to the genocide in the first place. And she took a lot of criticism for that. I would be interested to hear her thoughts on that podcast. She still has that view. Yeah, I don't doubt it. Anyway, it's just like I've been reflecting on this a lot, obviously, over the last couple of days and today. Cool J. It's hard to believe that entire year has passed, right? Because it's like we've been on here not every single day for the last year, but like we've talked about this for hundreds of hours over the last year, following every horrible crime and every massacre, and just like repeatedly just watching in horror for the last year. So it's extremely hard to believe that it's been an entire year of this. And where are we a year later after tens of thousands of people dead? I don't even know like what death count to go with anymore. I try to stick with the one from the Gaza Health Ministry, which says that over 40,000 people have died. We've seen estimates, obviously, that put that number as way higher, and perhaps we're just not going to be able to confirm that for a while. But it's like, where are we a year later? Like, it's still endless funding from the U.S. government. You still have elected officials in the United States, including both presidential candidates, just bending over backwards to never acknowledge any of the crimes, any of the horrors. You still have Kamala Harris a year into this talking about Israel's right to defend itself. And we're going to look at some of the statements from Kamala Harris and Justin Trudeau, a year into this, still repeating all the same thing. And I think one of the most striking things, as well as all of the narratives that have totally collapsed about October 7th since that time, and it hasn't meant anything. It hasn't changed one thing. The horror stories, the beheaded babies, the mass rapes. It's everything with babies, and as always a confession as well. The babies in ovens, beheaded babies, babies with their throats cut. These were all the stories that were going out there in the days following this incident, which were all designed to justify the last year of what we've seen. And no matter how many of these stories get debunked, it doesn't seem to change the calculus from anyone that's actually in power and subsidizing this. You still have, to this day, with everything that's been debunked, you still have people out there. I saw Obama today saying 1,400 people were killed. Like, the number's going back up. That number, the number of people killed on that day, it went down for a little while, now it's going back up. Now, according to Barack Obama, it's 1,400. And none of these stories that have been debunked have meant anything. All of these things which have turned out to be blatant lies, it hasn't changed any of the calculus for people in charge. And there's been so much reporting, mainstream reporting, including in Israeli media. And I don't want to fixate on Israeli media either, because like we shouldn't have to rely on Israeli media when people, Palestinians such as Rafat al-Arir on that day were saying this about the Hannibal Directive. There's been so much reporting about the Hannibal Directive and all the questions that have been swirling around that. What happened at this Nova festival with these Apache helicopters? What happened at some of these kibbutzes that were being bombed and shelled by tanks? There's been so much real mainstream reporting on that, and that hasn't changed the calculation as well. And no one in power in any of these Western countries, in Canada or the UK or the United States, have ever even mentioned this. They've never even mentioned anything about this. And it's not like some tinfoil hat conspiracy. Like, there's been plenty of reporting, like decent quality reporting about what actually happened on that day. And it just has meant nothing. I think that's the thing that I'm most struck by today. You know? The fact that no matter what horror stories about October 7th get debunked, no matter what reporting comes out about Israel's own action, their own actions on that day, it hasn't meant anything. It hasn't meant anything at all. You still have them getting an endless supply of bombs from the United States government that they're dropping on like little kids in tents, or they're dropping now in Lebanon, or Syria, or Yemen. So it hasn't changed the narrative at all. It hasn't changed the Western ironclad support for Israel at all. And they're still just acting with complete impunity. I think that's the thing that I'm most just. I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't be stunned. I guess none of us should be surprised, but it is insane. Jugmeat posted some milk toast. Remember the Hamas violence post, got ratioed in the comments and deleted it. Good job. I mean, even one of the most amazing things is you'll see people like look at this Justin Trudeau post, right? On October 7th, the terrorist organization Hamas launched a horrifying attack against Israel. We stand with Jewish people and Israelis on this painful anniversary. We won't relent. Not the Jewish people that are against Israel, though. We don't stand with them. No, we send jackbooted thugs to beat the shit out of them, actually. We don't stand with them at all. We won't relent until we see every last hostage return home safely. How many hostages have been killed by Israel? As like even the families of these hostages acknowledge that it's Netanyahu and the Israeli government that's preventing them from being returned. So you have a lot of people, talking about, no, this is not good enough. A lot of the leftist types, but then you have so you have other people on the left being like, "What the fuck are you talking about? We've supported genocide for the last year," and then you have these right wingers being like, "Remember when terrorists thanked your government?" Keep talking out of both sides of your mouth. You are not a friend of the Jewish community. You're not a true ally to Israel. You have literally done nothing to bring hostages back and instead got a thank you from Hamas while allowing their supporters to take over Canadian streets. Weak and pathetic. Why are you funding Hamas and letting them terrorize Canadians? You fund Hamas through UNRWA. We see through your virtue signaling. So even like the biggest Zionists don't even think they think Justin Trudeau and Kamala Harris all support Hamas. Like, what more do they want? That's a great question, Joe. I don't know. I don't know what more what more could we possibly do? What more could they possibly do? I don't know. Kamala Harris says, and again, like, it's just insane to me that nothing that's happened over the last year with any of these narratives that have been totally debunked have meant a fucking thing to any of these people. Supporting genocide is a thankless job for Justin. Exactly. Kamala Harris says, I will never forget the horror of October 7th, 2023, when Hamas terrorists brutally attacked Israel. 1,200 innocent people, including 46 Americans, were massacred by Hamas terrorists, which is interesting. They care about Americans being killed by Hamas. But when Israel repeatedly kills Americans in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Lebanon, it's like, what happened? We don't know. We don't know what happened with that. It was women raped on the side of the road, she said. So she says 1,200 innocent people, including 46 Americans, massacred by Hamas. Women raped on the side of the road. 250 people kidnapped. It was the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. What Hamas did that day was pure evil. It was brutal and sickening, and it has rekindled a deep fear among the Jewish people, not just in Israel, but in the United States and around the world. Again, let's not talk about the Jewish people in the United States, Canada, Germany, the UK, who are correctly standing against genocide and correctly standing with the Palestinian people who are getting the shit beat out of them by jackbooted thugs in the name of protecting them from anti-Semitism. Let's not talk about those Jewish people, right? We care about certain people's Jewish safety. This is something I remember talking about with Justin Potter and John Elmer, all the way back in November of last year. We care about certain people's safety, certain Jewish people's safety. Yeah, the squirrel is always on top of this. That doesn't fit their propaganda, so it doesn't exist. I mean, it's just like. And then she says again, we also pray for the safety of Jewish people all around the world. But which ones, though? Which Jewish people? I will do everything in my power to ensure that the threat Hamas poses is eliminated, that it is never again able to govern Gaza, that it fails in its mission to annihilate Israel, that the people of Gaza are free from the grip of Hamas. This is just sickening. This is just so sick. I was prepared to read some of these statements today and look at this stuff, but it's just honestly so fucking gross. Which gets back to their whole fixation on this ceasefire, right? Oh, I've been working tirelessly for a ceasefire. A ceasefire that demands that certain people are just not allowed to be involved in the governance of Gaza following. A ceasefire that demands that they completely give up and surrender on the terms that Israel and the United States is dictating. And they can't even get Israel on board with that. It's like a day coming that I know I'm going to read a bunch of stuff that's going to make me mad, and still doing it. Here's Obama, barf sack o crumbo, as some people were referring to him. 1 year ago, Hamas launched a horrific attack against Israel, killing over 1,400 Israeli citizens. You see how it goes up. It goes up and down. Including defenseless women, children, and the elderly, kidnapping hundreds more. Today, the prospects of peace seem more distant than ever. We continue to hope for a return of all the hostages, an end to the violence, a rejection of hate, and a future in which both Israelis and Palestinians can enjoy the security and stability that most of them. I mean, this fixation on children, too, being killed on that day. When you look at the lists of Gazans that have been killed, and the first several pages of these lists of people killed are all children. Every time you support Hamas, the number goes up by 200. There is. Let me see if I can find it. There's a statement from physicians that have every single physician. Again, we're talking about this fixation on children killed on that day. From a letter to Biden and Harris signed by nearly 100 medical volunteers in Gaza. Every one of us who worked in an emergency, intensive care, or surgical setting treated pre-teen children who were shot in the head or chest on a regular or even daily basis. Children are universally considered innocents in armed conflict. However, every signatory to this letter saw children in Gaza who suffered violence that must have been deliberately directed at them. Specifically, every one of us who worked in an emergency, intensive care, or surgical setting treated preteen children who were shot in the head or chest on a regular or even daily basis. It is impossible that such widespread shooting of young children throughout Gaza, sustained over the course of an entire year, is accidental or unknown to the highest Israeli civilian and military authority. And the real sickening thing about Obama too, you can see him. Here he is with Edward Said in this image. Like this is the thing that makes Obama evil. Like not just like a bad person, but actually actively evil, is that he knows the history. And when he talks about October 7th, like it's just something that happened in this vacuum. This just like this random attack and assault that happened. You know? He knows. He knows the history. He's not stupid. He's a very smart person. He's not stupid at all. He knows this history. He knows what's been going on in Palestine for the last 70 years. He knows full well. And he still does this. He still talks like this. And he still gave Israel everything that they wanted throughout his whole administration, except on the way out the door, they had some mild criticism of the settlement process. And I believe they voted, they abstained on a crucial vote at the UN on their way out when they no longer could have any political consequences. Guess what? Zionists hate him too. That's why why do they keep bending over backwards with people who hate him? I mean, that was his whole administration, right? Bending over backwards to appease these Republicans that thought he was a secret Muslim terrorist or whatever it was, while punching left. This is how these liberals operate. Obama, fully aware, used to speak on Palestine, the most cynical operator in the game. It just makes your blood boil because he fully knows. The truth doesn't get you a house in Hawaii. I mean, there's the whole like conspiracy angle about Obama's whole life and his mom and her relationship with the American intelligence apparatus and anti-communism and all this stuff. But it makes you believe it. He's so deeply cynical and evil that it really makes you believe that. And look, are you ready to see some some inspiring leadership here? It's funny because I've been watching Veep, and like it's hard to laugh about anything today, but like it's impossible not to laugh at this fucking word salad here. On Israeli PM ignoring U.S. calls. Let's hear what this inspiring leadership has to say about this.
We supply Israel with billions of dollars in military aid. Mm-hmm. And yet Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be charting his own course. The Biden-Harris administration has pressed him to agree to a ceasefire. He's resisted. You urged him not to go into Lebanon. He went in anyway. He has promised to make Iran pay for the missile attack, and that has the potential of expanding the war. Does the U.S. have no sway over Prime Minister Netanyahu?
The aid that we have given Israel allowed Israel to defend itself against 200 ballistic missiles that were just meant to attack the Israelis and the people of Israel.
All military targets,
when we think
zero
about
civilian
the threat
casualties
that Hamas, Hezbollah presents, Iran, I think that it is without any question our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend
this is not
itself
answering the
against
question
those kinds
at
of
all.
attacks. Now, the work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end.
I mean, there's been reporting now that like Anthony Blinken fully was aware.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Didn't see the alert. What's going on with that? Hello, Majority Report. Welcome. Hello and welcome to Majority Report. Please bring it in. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rob. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you. It's nice to have you. Thank you for being here. How is the Majority Report stream today? Please smash the follow button if you can. If you're not already following the channel. Just did. Hell, there we go. Spectrophonic. I appreciate it. We're just talking, it's obviously October 7th today. It's been one entire year of Israel's brutal, horrific, criminal war on people of Gaza, and as well now Lebanon and other surrounding areas. We're just watching this like complete nonsensical word salad by Kamala Harris, responding to these very legitimate questions about how the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't seem to actually be doing anything the United States wants them to do, and they just keep sending a nonstop flow of weapons to this country, despite the fact that like they're completely out of control, and just paying attention to this total word salad nonsense on the part of Kamala Harris. Like, you know, this has been going on for decades, obviously, and I guess I've gotten used to this idea of liberal politicians being just fixating on this idea of Israel's right to defend itself. But I think it's genuinely still shocking to me. We shouldn't lose our capacity to be shocked. And I think it's genuinely very, very shocking to me still that 1 year into this absolute barbarism, that there's still any question about, you know, civilian deaths, any question about the Israeli government being completely out of control, any question about the nonstop flow of weapons to Israel and all the repercussions of that, they still fix it on this idea of Israel's right to defend itself. Still, after 1 year of all these crimes that we've seen just right in front of our eyes every single day, a nonstop stream of the most horrifying crimes we've ever seen every single day of our lives for the last year. And you still have Western politicians, whether it's Justin Trudeau, whether it's Kamala Harris, talking about Israel's right to defend itself. Still. Your client state seems out of control. What are you going to do about it? Absolutely nothing, because Muslims are scary and actually they're not out of control. We told them to defy us. Yeah. Well, this is what I was saying. Like when she talks about their values, you know, we made clear about our values that humanitarian aid needs to get in, that this war needs to end. First of all, I think it's a weird thing when you say this war needs to end to still send a nonstop flow of weapons to the country that's prosecuting the war, that's taking these weapons, like 500 kilogram bombs, and dropping them on schools and hospitals and people sleeping in tents, you know? So I think it's a little weird to say, oh, we want the war to end and simultaneously ship nonstop flow of arms to the country that's doing the war, that's doing the genocide, number one. And then talking about this like idea of like, we want aid to get in. Like there's been reporting coming out lately that Anthony Blinken knew full well that Israel was not allowing the aid to get in. And that they've fully supported them anyways, and actually lied about it as well, lied about it to Congress. We want the war to end, but they don't want to negotiate. And then it goes back to like what everyone knows about Israel, which is that it's Israel that doesn't want to negotiate. And they're still they're still victim blaming. They're still victim blaming the people that have been having this genocide perpetrated against them for the last year. Anyway, I think that's interesting given this reporting that's come out about Anthony Blinken and their full knowledge that Israel's blocking the aid from getting in. Yeah, prosecute Blinken for lying to Congress. I mean, all these people should be prosecuted for being mass murderers. But yeah, if you want to get him on the technicality, like Al Capone's taxes or whatever, yes. Giving your kid a whole carton of cigarettes to punish them for smoking.
Work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end, the need for a deal to be done, which would release the hostages and create a ceasefire. And we're not going to stop in terms of putting that pressure on Israel and in the region, including Arab leaders.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted
Here's the
in
word,
a
count on me. You're
number
going to have good old Rob to talk you through all
movements
this.
in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Do we have
What the fuck does that mean? That she just said nothing at all. The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements by Israel in that region that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region? I mean, is that the argument that they're going with? That it's like, oh, it would have been actually way worse. It would have been even worse than what we've seen. They've really held back because of how tough we've been on them. Like in Rafah, for example, that was the big red line. Have you looked at a picture of Rafah lately? A satellite image of Rafah lately? That's our red line. You can't cross that. They have absolutely destroyed Rafah. Like, that is an absolutely insane line.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu
I got to hear that
is
again.
not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think
The guy who
with all due
openly
respect,
wants the
better
other guy to win the
question
election.
is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
So no, to Netanyahu then. And it's just like... She's so weak, she's going to lose hard. Honestly, Squatch, I've been trying not to make any big predictions on this, and I'm still not going to, but I think last week when we were looking at all of these, like, when we were looking at the rally with Liz Cheney the other day, that's when I was like, she's going to fucking lose. I think that's the first moment that I've really thought that. I don't want to make a prediction. I think it's a toss-up. I certainly don't think it's a guarantee. But like, that was the first moment that I was just like, okay, they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose. And like, maybe that's not what's gonna happen. Again, I'm not making a big prediction. You know, but I've talked about the sense of frustration too. Like, when she did take over, there was this brief opportunity to do something different. There was a brief opportunity to capitalize on the excitement that people were feeling. And all of that has been completely squandered. Diego, thank you for gifting us up a few moments ago. Kamal will be like, don't ever for any reason do anything to anyone for any reason ever, no matter what, no matter where or who you're with, or where you're going or where you've been, ever, for any reason whatsoever. I mean, it's honestly, this statement was the deep thing that I've seen. And you have Biden the other day. He gave a press conference. Do that. When they're basically openly asking both Biden and Kamala Harris about the fact that Netanyahu is like openly trying to hurt their election chances, openly trying to help the other guy win. And this is what they say.
Thank you, Kareem. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for being here. This week, Senator Chris Murphy said it's certainly a possibility that the Israeli government is not going to sign any diplomatic agreement prior to the election, which is what you have been calling for so long, potentially to try to influence the result. Do you agree? Do you have any worries that Netanyahu may be trying to influence the election and that's why he has not agreed to a diplomatic solution?
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None.
Yeah, no shit, buddy.
None. And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
Thank you, Kareem. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for being.
And like people are pointing out, Trump is an even more shriveled up candidate or whatever it is. Like, I agree. Like, I think if Trump and JD Vance win this election, it's going to be a calamity. But that's the issue, is that the Democrats have done every single thing possible to ensure that that is going to be the result. I've helped create more corpses than any of my predecessors. Just what can you even say about it? I don't know. These people are just so fucking sick. They're grotesque monsters. I'm not counting on that. Like, maybe this would be a good opportunity to look at some stuff about October 7th and the actual, like the Hannibal directive and the actual reporting that's been done about what actually happened on that day, considering that we're still going through this whole song and dance about this unprompted massacre that happened. Did he misunderstand the question and thought they were suggesting Bibi was trying to influence it in his favor? I don't think so, because he says pointedly, he's just like, you should remember that no one's done more for Israel than I have, Jack. You know? I've been scammed so badly, but doesn't he understand? I've helped his scheme so much he has to share with me too. I mean, it's just so weak and feckless. You guys like Dick Cheney, right? As they're wrapping up the Dick Cheney endorsement. I don't think he's thinking at all at this point. I think so either. I would still like to watch this story, this Al Jazeera investigation about war crimes in Gaza, but I'm still not even sure that I can watch it on this stream. The shoebox scam comes to mind. It's the same bullshit. What's this shoebox scam? Like, this is why it's so frustrating. I talked about like all the responses to October 7th today that have, like, with all the reporting that's been done, and we can look at like electronic intifada, but like there's been a ton of reporting about this, you know?
Wow. Okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
Goodness, blurp blurp. Thank you so much for 10 gifted subs. That's really, really kind of you. Sorry, I can hear myself speaking in the I'm hearing this echo effect as a result. Blurp blurp, I really appreciate that. That's really, really cool that you did that. Thank you for that. I don't know why my alerts aren't. What's going on with that? Guess I shouldn't try to troubleshoot. I think we're in for a repeat of Hillary with Kamala. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, even there was stories the other day about Hillary advising them. Like, she's taking advice from Hillary. I don't know why you would take campaign advice on how to beat Donald Trump from the person who did not beat Donald Trump. And they're like, that is inarguable, is that they're running the exact same campaign.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Resistance until liberation.
Tiniest Boop, thanks so much for the 38 months. Tiniest Boop, I really appreciate it. This is it. So Hillary Clinton is advising Kamala Harris on how to beat Donald Trump, who's someone who famously did not beat Donald Trump, and they're running the identical campaign. And like I keep saying, I'm not making any predictions about what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that they are running an identical campaign and targeting the exact same, like, moderate, non-existent moderate Republicans. They're pitching a campaign. This is also similar to Obama's whole administration, which Obama was able to be successful because he's uniquely charismatic and intelligent and a good politician. But it's basically a campaign and administration that's pitched at centrist New York Times columnists. Like, that's the whole Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney endorsement thing. There's no actual voting constituency that's like swayed by that or going to come on board the program because of that. It's entirely pitched at like the Thomas Friedmans of the world or the David Brooks of the world. That's the entire purpose of doing that. So, yes, I believe that she's advising the campaign because it's the identical campaign. It's the exact same thing. And all the excitement that they might have had at one point, especially after the Walz pick, has completely dissipated because they've made clear that this is the campaign they're running. And even Walz, who has a lot of like positive things about him, his ability to talk about like progressive economic policy. I've talked about like when they first picked him, he's taken some really, I think, decent progressive foreign policy stances over the years. And he's out there now saying like Iran's the one that needs to be confronted. Iran's the problem. They're the belligerent ones that have been funding all these groups and creating all this chaos. So it's just like, what did you even pick this guy for? Like, what was the purpose of any of this?
So what is your assessment of the stakes of this election? I mean, you are in a very exclusive club of people who've ever run for president, let alone run against Donald Trump. So to what extent do you offer counsel or do you speak with Kamala Harris about how to run against Donald Trump, who, as you've said, is a different candidate now, a darker candidate, arguably, than he was in 2016?
That's absolutely true, Willie. You know, I've talked with Kamala a few times. I obviously talked with her before the debate. Because he is more incoherent. He is angrier. He is lashing out all the time at everybody. He's filled with grievance and rage. And, you know, in my acceptance speech at the convention way back in 2016, I said, you know, you can't trust somebody with nuclear weapons who you can bait with a tweet, because I saw that in him at the time. A lot of people didn't, or they gave him the benefit of the doubt, or they thought, hey, you know, we've had 2 terms of a Democrat, let's try the Republicans, for whatever reason. I understand.
I wish you would just go away. Why do they keep bringing her back? Because it's a big club and you ain't in it. Good luck now. It's a big club and you ain't in it.
Understand that. But now the stakes are even higher because he has a record. We have seen him try to abuse power. We have seen him try to overturn a legitimate, free, fair election. We have watched him bungle COVID and cause unnecessary deaths and pain.
How bad he is, and it's
he has a record. And in addition to that, he's told us what he's going to do. He is absolutely linked to this Project 2025 and all of their dark and dystopian efforts to turn the clock back on Americans' rights and the way we live and how we, you know, look at our futures together. And he has a long rhetorical record now of making it very clear that he would be unaccountable if he were ever near the White House again.
And like all the thing about Donald Trump being dangerous, and I think it would be a really real disaster if he did win. Couldn't agree more. And you know what? It's totally neck and neck with this. Why is that? Why is that happening? Let me see if I can find this clip. The clip of her talking about like the student protests is genuinely insane. I don't think I've bookmarked, but it's absolutely fucking crazy. When she talks about these like campus protests and encampments, and basically like the reason that young people in the US are against this fucking it's the mental gymnastics argument, right? It's like the idea that like perhaps young people are just taking out their phones and seeing a nonstop stream of video evidence of Israel murdering little kids and blowing up hospitals and schools and killing UN workers and just assassinating people with total impunity, bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen. the stories about like mass rapes happening of Palestinians in Israeli detention facilities, literally rioting because like there's a possible consequences coming down for the army units that have been accused of raping people. Perhaps that's the reason that young people today are against Israel. And Hillary is like literally going on TV and being like, these are Iran-funded talking points, these student encampments, and it's people are being manipulated and brainwashed by this Chinese TikTok algorithm. And that's the reason. That's the reason that young people are against Israel. And these are the people that are like the power players in the Democratic Party and the mainstream liberalism. I'm trying to find the clip. I wish I could find it. I don't know if anyone knows the clip that I'm talking about that can find it faster than I can, so I don't have this situation where I'm just scrolling and looking at dead air. But it is absolutely insane now. She carpetbagged a Senate seat in New York. Yeah, the most qualified candidate ever. Is this it, Onyx? If it is, I'm going to be very happy. I don't think this is the exact clip that I was thinking about, but probably worth watching as well if we're just looking at stuff that's going to make us mad today.
Violence in conflict, the use of sexual violence in conflict was especially horrendous. I teach now at Columbia at the School of International and Public Affairs, and we had an event. We had 2 events last week. We had 3 panels about Ukraine, and they were superb. They went off without a hitch. We learned a lot and were challenged. 2 days later, we had panels on conflict-related sexual violence. It included Ukraine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Israel. And it was protested. You just have to ask yourself how you could have an event focused on using rape as a tactic of war against women and girls.
It's also, I think it's worth pointing out as well, people like Hillary Clinton that are obsessed with this idea of like disinformation and conspiracy theories. And they want to like increase censorship. They want to increase the ability of the US government to like censor these kinds of views, these kind of conspiratorial views, and this kind of disinformation, kind of Russian disinformation, which now basically accuses like any kind of like African media, anything that remotely resembles like anti-colonialism or Pan-Africanism. That's all Russian propaganda as well. We got to censor these kinds of views, these conspiracies, this disinformation. And then she's there spreading disinformation herself about using rape as a weapon of war, you know, which is another aspect of this story in addition to the Hannibal Directive that's been repeatedly debunked. And there's never been one shred of evidence that any of that is true whatsoever.
Which is in conflict across the world. And you include the most recent horrendous example out of Israel, and that brings out the protesters. So there is an invidious strain of anti-Semitism that has never gone away, but we had hopes. It had been certainly submerged, that has been poking its head up for quite some time.
This is some guy,
now.
Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Capri Sun Pappy, thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. How was the Capri Sun Pappy stream today? It's me, Rob, folks. Thanks for joining me. Please smash the follow button if you can. It's October 7th. It's been a year of the Israeli genocide, and we're looking at a bunch of stuff and getting real mad today. That's what we're doing. We're getting real mad. And right now we're talking about Hillary Clinton spreading this disinformation and conspiracy theory about what happened on October 7th, and also accusing student protesters of being foreign agitators. And this is the clip that I was referring to before. We're here for it. Free Palestine. Hell yeah. Thanks again for the raid, Capri Sun Pappy. I appreciate it. And once again, folks, if you can, please smash the follow button and join the community if you want to.
And we are back with the former First Lady, former Secretary of State, former Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. Mrs. Clinton, along with President Clinton and Chelsea, will welcome world leaders to the Clinton Global Initiative.
Like, listen to the bad shit, insane things that these mainstream liberals believe. And these are the folks that want to have influence over, want to talk to us about what conspiracies are, what disinformation
debate
is.
At home is also very complicated, and you've watched it in a sense, and participated in a way, because you've been teaching this course at Columbia, and I think there has been some student reaction. Describe what what's your sense of what's going on campuses with the Middle East right now?
Well, actually, I have a whole chapter about that in the book because it was quite striking to me. I co-teach a course with the dean, a very distinguished political scientist at the School of International and Public Affairs, called Inside the Situation Room. We'd love to have you come, some class for Reed. Incredible students, very large lecture class. Like
these are training the next generation of American political leadership.
Across the university, mostly students from SEPA, the school we teach in. And we taught the Wednesday after October 7th. And it was a very somber, difficult class. We hurried through our prepared curriculum, and then we basically sat down and answered questions for 45, 50 minutes. And the questions were really raw. I mean, we had a student from Palestine, a Palestinian student. We had a student from Israel. We had students from across the Middle East. We had students from Asia, obviously the rest of the world, struggling to understand what all of it meant. But it was a respectful, informative, open dialogue. And literally at the end of it, the students applauded. That was on Wednesday. Within a few days, we were doing an event, and we started being protested, the dean and I and our guests, and being screamed at, being called, all kinds of names. What
genocide
happened in that
supporters?
Period? And the best I can sort of unpack
you should
it,
be called that. The butcher of Libya, they call her.
There were already existing groups within our country, and particularly on certain campuses like Columbia, who had talking points. They had a plan for protest and disruption. And I watched it sort of morph into something that was not student-led, even though students participated.
And remember, this is the generation that lectures everyone about McCarthyism and the dangers of McCarthyism and how they were so brave to make it through that period. And they're the exact same people that are trying to usher in a new era of McCarthyism.
But which had outside funding, outside direction, and I still to this day am not quite sure of all that was going on with it. And a lot of students were caught up in that. And a lot of the videos on social media gave not just a one-sided view of the conflict, but a totally anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, not just pro-Palestinian.
People were so radicalized by these anti-Israel propaganda videos of people carrying around plastic bags with the remains of what used to be a child in there. People were so radical. They weren't getting both sides when they see every single day these kinds of images on their phones. And we're not hearing a nuanced view of that. None of these videos are showing the slaughter, talking about how complex it is.
View. And for me, it was distressing because, look, I have my own opinions formed over many years. I am willing to sit down and have a conversation with anybody. But it's difficult to have conversations with people who hold strong opinions with no factual and historical basis. And so in trying to talk to students, not just at Columbia, but elsewhere, I would be met
no
with
factual and historical
slogans.
basis, these pro-Palestine students that talk about the occupation.
Attacks and, very inflammatory language. And when I would ask, well, what about, do you know what happened in 2000 at Camp David? No.
Yeah,
do
more
you know
disinformation.
What happened in 1947?
This whole narrative about Palestinians, they said no to having their own state.
How difficult the relationships have been? No. Do you know that there are Arab Israelis and some are serving in the IDF? None of that. And this whole chanting of, from the river to the sea, what does that mean? What river? What sea? That's what bothered me. And I think this year has been, much quieter, a much more educational environment where people can have these conversations. The ugly presence of anti-Semitism, not just positions against Israel. It's perfectly legitimate. I don't like what that country does, and I don't agree with that country's foreign policy.
It doesn't seem like you do think it's legitimate.
Absolutely what you should be debating at a university. This was not that. This was screaming at students who were Jewish. It was blocking their entry into classes or
again, no mention of the Jewish students that are part of these protest movements.
It was nasty. And so there was something else going on here that was very troubling. And we now, have seen evidence of, obviously foreign money, foreign influence.
Where's this evidence?
The algorithms on TikTok, which were anti-Israel right off the bat. And so I think that a university particularly has an obligation to, of course, protect free speech, but also to protect students against harassment and against the kind of behavior that interfered with their learning. So that's where we are now.
Most of those were posted by the IDF. They just didn't realize it was anti-Israel to post their own war crimes. I mean, this is just what this new Al Jazeera documentary is, right? It's just a collection of war crimes that have been posted by the IDF and by Israeli soldiers themselves. They're the first people that have been doing this. Anyway, I don't want to spend all October 7th talking about fucking Hillary Clinton, but I do think it's important to talk about this because as in kind of avatar for the class in the United States, and the fact that the whole Kamala Harris campaign is basically is totally identical to the Hillary Clinton campaign that lost to Trump, and they're just running the exact same book, and apparently taking advice from Hillary herself. And once again, I think focusing on the idea that this is somebody, and this is also kind of pervasive across the liberal ruling class, that want to limit people's ability because of this disinformation. They want to talk about disinformation and conspiracy theories and limiting the scope of what we can talk about and learn about. And she's out there spreading her own conspiracy theory, her own disinformation. Perhaps a Discord doc viewing of the AJ documentary would be a good idea. Yeah, I think it would probably be a good idea. We have a better environment this school year. We successfully repressed all dissenting speech. Yeah, we put language into our document or guidelines about what constitutes anti-religious harassment to include anyone that supports Israel. We've successfully repressed. We've successfully militarized police to brutalize these encampment students, many of whom are Jewish, as we pointed out many. And now things are better now. Anyway, I do think it's worth watching this. As I've talked about, as we see all these statements from all these ghoulish Western leaders, Barack Obama or whoever it is, talking about what happened on. One of the things I talked about up front when we started getting into this today is talking about how much evidence there is. My mic keeps cutting out. That's good. That's good. I like. How much reporting has been done about October 7th and what actually happened on that day, and how many of these people that were killed on that day who were killed by the Israeli military, There's been plenty of reporting on this. This is not some kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy. There's been tons of reporting on it. Like I said, Palestinians like Rafat Al-Arir were talking about it on that very day. There's been a lot of reporting in Israeli media about this. Not that we should just rely on that. I think we should listen to what Palestinians as well. But the fact that, like, despite all of this reporting that's happened and all the what we objectively know to be true is that there was a significant number of people on that day. We don't know the exact number. Maybe we'll never know the exact number. A significant number of people on that day that were killed by the Israeli. We know that there's been plenty of reporting on this. None of this has made any impact whatsoever in Western media. Never been discussed. None of these Western leaders that cry all these crocodile tears about people that were killed on October 7th have ever even mentioned this. It's just been completely memory hold, this whole story. Like, there's other things that we could look at about this, but this is from Electronic Intifada 8 months ago. This is from 8 months ago, and there's been more reporting since that time.
Asa, in the past week, you published a phenomenal report based on information that was only published in Hebrew, I think, still to this day, about more on the Hannibal Directive ordered by Israeli commanders to have their troops fire on Israeli civilians on October 7th. And you've prepared a presentation here about that report and these findings, and so let's get into it.
Okay, thank you very much, Nora. Do you remember this video from the aftermath of the 7th of October
this image
assault?
is just shocking.
Hundreds of destroyed cars were rounded up by the Israeli military and later piled up in a car lot in Netivot, an Israeli settlement near Gaza. Would it shock you to learn that much of this destruction was caused not by Palestinians, but by Israel? If you're one of our regular viewers or listeners, this won't come as a surprise. But now, a major new investigative piece by 2 Israeli journalists shows that official Israeli estimates have privately concluded that at least 70 of these vehicles were blown up by Israel. That is to say, by helicopter gunships, drones, or tanks. Many of these vehicles, driven by Palestinian fighters on their way back to Gaza, contained Israelis that they had taken captive. This new piece that you can see here was published in 7 days, which is the weekend supplement of the mainstream Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot. And this piece confirms what we've been saying all along, which is that Israel reactivated the Hannibal Directive on the 7th of October. Journalists Ronan Bergman and Yoav Zitun wrote that it is not clear at this stage how many of the captives were killed due to the operation of this order. That is an order to the Air Force that they should prevent return to Gaza at all costs. And a quote from the article, "At least in some of the cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed," the journalists explained. Now that, of course, would have included many Israeli captives. Now, the paper's online version, Ynet, has not translated the piece into English. So we asked our longtime professional Hebrew translator and Israel expert, Dina Shunra, to translate it for us. So all quotes of the article that I'm reading now are taken from that translation, and you can read it in its entirety at the end of this report that I've written at the electronicintifada.net. So we'll put a link to it in the description for this episode. Now, Bergman and Zitun's investigation found that at midday on the 7th of October, Israel's Supreme Military Headquarters ordered all units to prevent the capture of Israeli citizens, quote, at any cost, unquote, including by firing on them. Quote, at midday of October 7th, the IDF instructed all its fighting units to perform the Hannibal Directive in practice, although it did so without stating that name explicitly. End of quote. As the Israeli piece explains, and as we've reported in detail recently, the Hannibal Directive was established in 1986 after the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers in then-occupied southern Lebanon by fighters from the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah. The secretive Hannibal Doctrine is named after an ancient Carthaginian general who poisoned himself instead of being captured alive by the Roman Empire. Now, Bergman and Zaytoun say that the original wording of the Hannibal Directive ordered Israeli forces to, quote, halt the capturing force at any price, and that, quote, in the course of a capture, the main task becomes rescuing our soldiers from the captors, even at the price of hitting or injuring our soldiers, end of quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that the concept of rescuing Israelis by shooting at them is an interesting one, to say the least. In 2016, the Israeli military claimed that the Hannibal Doctrine had been revoked or at least clarified, depending on which reports you believe. But as we've been saying for the past 4 months, all indications were, in reality, that Israel had revived the Hannibal Directive.
I'm sorry, it's crazy to me that, like, in all the bullshit about October 7th today, that, like, despite all the evidence that there is about this, it's just not mentioned. Like, it's so shocking to me still. I don't know why it should be. Like, it shouldn't be shocking, but it is. The fact that, like, this has just not made a dent. It has not made a dent in the Western media narrative about this. Like, I genuinely find it so fucked up.
And has been using it to kill Israelis since the Palestinian military offensive that began on the 7th of October. Bergman and Zaytoun's new article is the first confirmation, by Israeli media no less, that there was a specific order from the top of Israel's military hierarchy to reactivate this suicidal military doctrine on the 7th of October. Bergman and Zaytoun's article says that at midday on the 7th of October, the Israeli military, quote, decided to return to a version of the Hannibal Directive. They write that, quote, the instruction was to stop at any cost any attempt by Hamas terrorists, I'm quoting from them, to return to Gaza, using language very similar to that of the original Hannibal Directive, despite repeated promises by the defense apparatus that the directive had been cancelled, end of quote. Now, none of this means that the attack that began on the 7th of October was a false flag, or even that Palestinians didn't kill any civilians at all. But what it does mean is that, in the words of another Israeli article, which we reported on last month, quote, casualties fell as a result of friendly fire on October 7th, but the IDF believes that beyond the operational investigations of the events, it would not be morally sound to investigate these incidents due to the immense and complex quantity of them that took place. An immense and complex quantity of friendly fire, but neither was, that's what it says there. It says that there was an immense and complex quantity of friendly fire. It's an interesting idea. But neither was the 7th of October a massacre of Israeli civilians by Palestinian terrorists, the way it's been portrayed by the mainstream media. Rather, it was a carefully calculated military offensive planned for possibly as long as 2 years in advance. It was aimed overwhelmingly at military targets. Hamas insists that it did not aim to kill civilians, but that some faults may have occurred. Rather,
I think that's one other element, not to like the fact that, like, the whole Hannibal Directive aspect and the role of the IDF in killing civilians on that day has been totally obscured. But again, all this stuff about a vicious, unprovoked assault, all this language being used by Kamala Harris and Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama or whatever, totally obscures the fact that This was an operation that primarily targeted military checkpoints and like military bases. And that gets totally obscured as well. And that's always been the thing that I've been most curious about over the last year as we've talked about this. Not to suggest that everything was perfect or that nothing bad happened whatsoever. You know, you can go back through any slave uprising or prison break throughout the years and you can find situations where civilians were killed or like Asa is pointing out, unplanned things happened. But I've always wanted to know like what the actual numbers are. Like how many of these people that were killed, if we take I guess 1,200 people as the number that people have gone with, that seems to be what the settled number is, even though Obama said it was higher. How many of those people were like active duty, on duty IDF soldiers at military bases and military checkpoints? And what's the exact number of people that were killed at the Nova Festival or some of these kibbutzes or wherever that were killed by the Israeli military? You know, there's never been an actual reckoning about that. I think there's been estimates, there's been speculation, but because of the ways these investigations have been obscured, it's like we may never know the actual answer to that question. That's always been something that I've been very curious about over the last year. And it would be nice if one day we could get an actual answer to that question, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen, considering the ways that, you know, it's been completely, all this stuff has been buried and obscured and obfuscated for the last year.
Its targets were military bases and outposts, as well as the militarized Israeli settlements along the frontier with Gaza, which by their very nature blur the distinction between military and civilian targets and act as human shields for the Israeli military. Indeed, one of the Gaza frontier settlements, Magen, is literally the Hebrew word for shield. Hamas says that it aimed to kill or capture Israeli soldiers. To quote our narrative, this document you can see on the screen here, which was recently released by Hamas, quote, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7 targeted Israeli military sites and sought to arrest the enemy's soldiers to put pressure on the Israeli authorities to release the thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli jails through a prisoner exchange deal. Therefore, the operation focused on destroying the Israeli army's Gaza division, the Israeli military sites stationed near the Israeli settlements around Gaza. End of quote. Hamas's military assault was well planned and very precisely executed. And the Bergman Zitun article provides a large amount of new evidence confirming this. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers were killed and about 240 Israelis were captured, including dozens of soldiers. Civilians were also taken prisoner, but Hamas offered to release them right away and actually did release them as soon as it was physically possible to do so during the week-long pause in fighting in November. The 7th of October was an unprecedented military success for the Palestinian resistance. To quote the words of a very senior Israeli military officer in the Bergman and Zitun article, the Gaza division was overpowered. The journalist's sources watched the day unfold from the Israeli military's Supreme Military Command position, which is an underground bunker deep below Tel Aviv, known as the Pit. The journalists recount that, quote, there was an almost total shock and such words, quote, had not been heard since the Yom Kippur War of October 1973. In fact, the Pit was almost totally in the dark. They had no clue about the scale of what was happening on the ground. According to Bergman and Zaytoun, quote, they turned to television and to social media feeds, to Telegram, primarily to Hamas channels. End of quote. The reason for this intelligence failure was quite simple. Hamas had skillfully targeted the communications infrastructure. Another quote, a preliminary investigation held in the last few days about the communication.
Like no context Gus is pointing out here. Of the 1160 killed, some 350 were active duty, 373 out of 1139. But also points out they didn't count private security, cops, or armed non-army folks as armed. They were counted as civilian. To say nothing of the entire context of like the mandatory military service and the fact that every single person is like involved in overseeing this occupation. You know, also worth pointing out. And what we don't know of that number as well is how many of those people were killed as part of this Hannibal directive, were killed by Israel's own military. And I don't know if we're ever going to know that. Settlements have a ton of private army folks patrolling, so the armed person number is much higher. Yeah. And I guess that's the thing that I just consistently remain very frustrated by, the fact that, like, with all this, like, bullshit that we're seeing today, all these Western leaders, how none of this information has made an iota of difference, you know, to their views of this and their full support for Israel's collective punishment that's still ongoing a year later.
Capacity of the Gaza division exposed the fact that some 40% of the communication sites, such as towers with relay antennas that the telecommunications department had deployed in recent years near the Gaza Strip border, were destroyed by Hamas on the morning of the invasion. Soon after the first videos of the Israeli captives emerged at midday, Israel's top military headquarters issued the order to all units to carry out the Hannibal Directive, Israel's suicidal military doctrine. The article also confirms a lot of the Electronic Intifada's previous reporting since the 7th of October about that day. In November, we reported on Israeli air footage, as well as interviews with attack helicopter pilots, showing that they had been ordered to shoot at everything. That's a quote from an article, shoot at everything, moving between Israel's frontier settlements and Gaza. That Israeli article stated that, quote, in the first 4 hours, helicopters and fighter craft attacked.
Those reports came from untrustworthy biased sources like Haaretz, yes, or maybe once we get down to the last Palestinian in Gaza, liberals will finally admit that maybe it was a bit much, or if they lose to Trump and Trump takes over, then they'll find their compassion all of a sudden and realize that now that the orange man has his finger on the trigger, it's something they need to care about.
About 300 targets, most in Israeli territory. And you can see the footage of it there. Now, Bergman and Zatoun's new article confirms this and actually expands on it, saying that by the end of the day, Drone Squadron 161 alone, quote, performed no fewer than 110 attacks on some 1,000 targets, most of which were inside Israel, end of quote. As we reported in English for the first time, Israeli news media last month showed footage of tank operators that you can see here, firing at Israeli homes inside a kibbutz during the battles with the Palestinian resistance on the 7th of October. This, in turn, confirmed our reports back in October about the testimony of Yasmin Porat, and we were the first to report on that in English.
Yeah, they only empathize with the oppressed once it's too late for them to do anything about it. Or it allows them to be like, oh, Kamala Harris, she wanted a ceasefire. Now Donald Trump doesn't want a ceasefire. Well, ignoring the role that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have played in creating this situation from moment one, right? And the fact that this ceasefire that they've been talking about is just complete bullshit. It's something that's been completely exposed as well. The ceasefire means unconditional surrender on Israel's terms. I was reading that the closest base to the concentration camp EDM festival is 8-minute drive away. They took 8 hours to show up. It's all very interesting, isn't it?
She was one of only 2 survivors of an Israeli attack on a home in Kibbutz Be'eri.
An Electronic Intifada doesn't get anywhere
and that
near enough
building
credit for actually
contained
reporting on
around a
these
dozen
things.
Captives held by Palestinian fighters. And Porat told Israeli media that the Palestinians had treated them humanely. But she said that the Israeli army ended a standoff with the fighters by deliberately tank shelling the house, even though the captives were still present. And she and one other woman were the only survivors of that. Porat later elaborated that the casualties of the Israeli attack included this girl, 12-year-old Israeli captive, Liel Hatzroni. Now, Hatzroni's photo, you may have seen it, was later used in propaganda by Israeli officials who wrongly claimed she had been burnt alive by Hamas because she's Jewish, was what Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, said. You can see him lying here in this tweet. Now, although it's being aggressively ignored by mainstream media in the West, who are even trying to punish independent journalists like us who report accurately on this, Israel's suicidal military doctrine is making waves inside Israeli society. We are killing our people, was how one family member of the captives pleaded. Families of the captives want to see their loved ones come home safely and are pushing for the Israeli government for that to happen by agreeing to a prisoner exchange deal with Hamas that would release all Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails.
You know, they were trying to October surprise a ceasefire, and Bibi just decided to kill anyone in the negotiations. Yeah, and now you have Joe Biden out doing press conferences, like ignoring this. The fact that like they're openly supporting, is fully supporting this person who's clearly trying to influence the upcoming election so the other guy gets in. And you have Joe Biden just bragging about how supportive they've been of this genocide the entire time.
Even Asa Kasher, the author of the Israeli army's so-called Code of Ethics, agrees with the families and is now calling for an immediate investigation of how the Hannibal Directive was used. But the reality seems to be that the Israeli government doesn't want the captives to come home alive, since the price of that would be a prisoner exchange deal to release the Palestinians. And that's why it has unleashed the Hannibal Directive. You can read more about all this in my article, and also remember that we've published the full text of the English translation of that Bergman Zetoun article appended to my own piece, so you can read that in full there. Thanks for watching this video.
Yeah, I mean, that all that reporting is from months ago. It's from 10 months ago. And, you know, and none of this is included in the, like, fucked up, disinformation-filled hagiography of the day that all our politicians are talking about. No one in the media has touched this.
For their own safety.
I haven't previewed this clip, but I think this might be good to look at as well. This is Abdul Wahid. It was posted yesterday.
The 7th of October 2023. 42,000 dead according to official estimates, half of them children, though according to the Lancet, it could be as many as 186,000. 90% of the people of Gaza displaced, the place a ruin, with the conflict and bloodshed spread to the West Bank, to Lebanon, and even to Yemen. So my question is, after all of that, what have we learned? What have we learned about the people who are suffering? Well, the people of Gaza have been extraordinary. Their dignity in their suffering has won the hearts of people around the world, not just Muslims, but non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, people of no faith have seen that these people are resilient. These people are steadfast. These people have strong iman and faith, which is extraordinary to behold. They've won people's hearts. People stand by them with their prayers, with their tears, with their marching, with their charity. The people of Gaza have taught the world about an occupation they were previously ignorant about. They've taught them about the best and the worst of humanity. What have we learned about the Zionist occupier? Well, we've learned that they're weaker than ever anyone thought they were before. When you massacre a civilian population which is unarmed and has no help, you can't call that strength. You can't call that bravery. When you try and silence people by force or by legal means from speaking the truth, you can't call that strength. It's weakness. We've also learnt that they're much more cruel and sadistic than we ever knew they were before. This sadistic cat and mouse game they play where they tell people to move for their own safety and then bomb them in the safe havens. We've learnt that nothing is safe. Not a hospital, not a school, not a university, not a mosque, not a church, not a refugee agency, not a journalist. No one is safe from their cruelty. And what did we learn about the occupation itself? Well, we've learned that it always was and still is a colonial occupation. First, it was intended to be a colony for Britain, and now it's intended to be a colony for the United States, as former Secretary of State Alexander Haig called it, America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East. The West is still arming them. The West is still giving them political cover. For the West, they see it as their vital interest in the globe, more important than Ukraine, more important than Taiwan. They're willing to give cover to their terrorism, which has been ongoing for the last 70 plus years, since the days of the Haganah, the Irgun and the Lehi, till the days today of the occupying force. All because they know that if any of the vulnerable regimes in the region go, they've lost control of the region. What have we learnt about the backers of the occupation in the West? Well, we've learnt that all their rhetoric about human rights and international law, it's meaningless. When they tolerate genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, torture, war crimes, it means that all this talk is meaningless. You have no moral ground to stand upon when you're trying to tell the rest of the world how to behave. What did we learn about international institutions like the UN? We learned they were only ever there to enforce the interests of the powerful states in the world.
A lot of people still don't see that. They think Israel runs the U.S., which is actually really interesting. Like in the wake of Nasrallah's assassination, a few days ago, there was this clip circulating of Nasrallah, who, as much as Nasrallah and Hezbollah get talked about like they're just these anti-Semitic monsters, right? But you have Nasrallah himself like debunking this idea that Israel controls the United States, like correctly recognizing that it's a colonial outpost of the United States that's fully subsidized by the United States, which I think is amazing considering the way like groups like Hezbollah or Nasrallah, like Nasrallah himself, are framed as just being these like anti-Semites, and they're motivated entirely by that. They're the first people to debunk this idea that Israel is kind of the tail wagging the dog. I can actually find that clip because it's really fascinating.
We learnt that they were never meant to police those powerful states and their allies. They were only meant for the weak, for the brown people, or for most of the rest of the ordinary world. What have we learnt about the Arab and Muslim world regimes? We learnt that they are the real Zionist defense force. They are the ones who secure the interests of the Zionists. They've done nothing to stop the killing. They've allowed the supply lines to continue. They've maintained their normal relationships. They've maintained their diplomatic relationships. Some of them even try and prevent their own people from speaking out against the occupation. If they disappeared, then the occupation would disappear. Because people have learned that actually it's not just Palestine that's occupied, but all the Muslim countries by colonial regimes that still exist. And what did we learn about the solution? We learned that a state-level military occupation that is slaughtering a civilian population demands a state-level military intervention by armies from the Arab and Muslim world, the official armies of those countries, to rescue the people. We've learned that that could have saved people, but for those regimes not willing to intervene. We've learned that resistance is not the same as liberation, and occupation demands liberation. We've learned the truth of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّمَا الْإِمَامَ الْجُنَّةِ, that indeed the Imam is a shield, and only the Imam. The Imam meaning the righteous, the legitimate Muslim ruler. Because the absence of that ruler means that the many resources in the Muslim world have not been released and mobilized to help the people of Gaza, Palestine, Lebanon, and beyond. We've learned that only when we have the restoration of the Khilafah in the Muslim world and the unifying of the resources of the Muslims and a sincere leadership can we expect that the liberation of Palestine should happen and the defense of the people, the rescuing of the mustad'afin, the weak, the oppressed, the Muslim children, the women, the men who have no one to defend them at the moment. What did we learn about ourselves? Did I do enough? Did I care enough? Am I one of those people that has wahan in my heart, that I care so much for this dunya that I'm not willing to give up my time, my energy, my effort to keep discussing this issue, to calling for the real solution, to working for it? Have I let despair take me over? Or do I trust in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring His victory? Do I realize that if all we ever do is just shout and make noise, or accept a change of face in government in the Muslim world, we aren't going to get a radical change, meaning a change where an Islamic system is there to unify the Muslims and unify our resources and deal with the many problems of occupation and misery and oppression in the Muslim world, most importantly, liberating the land of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. The question for me is, how much am I going to do now this matter has not ended? If I know what is the problem and I know what is the solution, shouldn't I be talking about it? Isn't the reality that Islam ruling over the region was the only time in history when Muslim, Jew and Christian could live side by side with peace and security and justice? Isn't that what I should be working for? So what have you and I learnt? Ask yourself this, because ultimately this matter has been a test for all of us. And if I haven't learnt anything in the last year, I haven't passed the test. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Yeah, that's Abdul Wahid. I don't know. I wanted to get that perspective out there as well. And I just like in the like talking about this whole tail wagging the dog thing. There's this Nasrallah clip that I was talking about, which I think is really interesting. Again, the way that he's framed in Western media versus the actual things that he has to say about this subject.
نعم. يعني إذا إسرائيل استهدفت إيران حتى ولو كان لوحدها أمريكا تتحمل مسؤولية هذا الاستهداف. في خطأ موجود بالعالم العربي بموضوع علاقة إسرائيل وأمريكا. وبنرجع بنعيد وبنرجع بنكرر، وهاي اسمح لي أقول لك أكذوبة اللوبي الصهيوني. انه اليهود هن حاكمين امريكا وهن بياخذوا القرار وهن عاملين وهن مساويين ومشاكل. لا، امريكا هي صاحبة القرار. بامريكا في شركات كبرى، في مثلث ثالوث، شركات النفط، شركات السلاح، وما يسمى بالصهيونية المسيحية، هو اصحاب القرار، هذا التحالف. اسرائيل كانت في الماضي أداة بريطانية والآن هي أداة أمريكية. No.
I think that's really fascinating, given the way that, like, you know, these groups are talked about in the West by Western political leaders and people in the media as being like anti-Semitic terrorist groups that just care about, you know, killing Jews, and like that's the whole framing of October 7th. This whole like framing of it as like the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. And when you actually look into what the leaders of these groups have to say about it, it does not bear any relation to reality. And Pelicans made an interesting statement a couple of moments back. The whole tail wagging the dog analysis assumes that the Israelis are doing something that the American foreign policy establishment thinks is doing more harm to than good, which I think is unlikely. Some Democrats might think this, but I don't think foreign policy leadership like Brett McGurk does. This is a chance to crush an Iranian ally and maybe even get into a war with Iran. Why would the American foreign policy establishment want to avoid that? Yeah, I don't doubt, Pelicans, that there are different factions of the foreign policy establishment. Some of them might be like, this has gone way too far. But yeah, obviously there's people, a sizable faction of people that fully agree with all of this stuff. I mean, look at all the discourse lately about like Israel going into Lebanon and all the stuff that like people like Jared Kushner are saying, oh, it's a chance to reshape the Middle East and this kind of stuff. Like they might still be, there might be factions that might think the Israelis have gone too far, but they're still salivating and chomping at the bit to like take this opportunity to completely geopolitically reshape this region, which they view Israel as being the catalyst for allowing that to happen. You know, even if they might find it a little uncouth, you know? Thank you, Up the Reds. I'm glad you could stop by. Here's another video on October 7th in the Hannibal Directive stuff. This is from Double Down News. Maybe we can take a look at that. And then I've got some France Fanon to read, which I think has been something that can really give us a lot of clarity on this and other kind of anti-colonial uprisings that have happened over.
Investigative unit, we've conducted a forensic, meticulous examination of the events of October the 7th. We uncovered very real crimes committed by Hamas and others. But I think
absolutely,
what was perhaps most significant were the crimes we discovered that did not happen. And it's hugely concerning that these revelations have been virtually entirely ignored by the Western press. What's extraordinary is the Israelis were aware of the plans. Hamas were actually training quite openly for this operation, and they were actually placing the training videos online so anyone could view them. On the very night of October the 7th, before dawn, spotters along the fence are reporting back to headquarters, and the head of Shin Bet and the head of military intelligence take this seriously enough that in the middle of the night, they're up and talking to each other, and they conclude it's just another training exercise. And what is extraordinary is that they don't even raise the alert level to number 1. You know, the most basic alert level would have made a huge difference. And they don't do that, which means that when Hamas bursts through the fence at 6:30 in the morning, they catch many of the defenders in their beds. I mean, you can see many of the soldiers are killed in their beds. Hamas had anticipated most of their fighters would be killed trying to get through the fence. In fact, only a small number were killed trying to get through the fence. They were as much taken by surprise as anyone by the performance of Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military. Crucially, also, they were taken by surprise by this very large music festival that was taking place, which they don't seem to have been aware of. Having overrun the military bases, the game plan was to grab hostages and take them back. And they do this on a large scale, but they also clearly kill very large numbers of unarmed civilians as well. The Israelis were then extraordinarily slow to respond. Now, they scramble Apache helicopters, but there's no ground control. It's pretty clear that in the chaos, some hostages at least were hit by Apache helicopter fire. We've identified 27 people who were clearly taken hostage, taken captive, and were taken away from their homes, but never made it to the fence, died somewhere between their homes and the fence. There's a fair chance that a number of them were killed by Apache helicopters. Within the kibbutzes, we've identified 18 people who were pretty much certainly killed by the police and the army as they arrived. 12 of them a specific incident in kibbutz Be'eri, where you have...
Yeah, I mean, Drippy, when you say I tend to agree with those who say that Bibi is the de facto military leader of the U.S. currently, while the mentally incapacitated President Biden remains in office. Israel does control the Mideast policy of the U.S. No, I don't. I just don't really agree with that. And like you might say Biden's mentally incapacitated, but like there doesn't seem to be any real distinction between his vision of this and Kamala Harris's. And what I think is more likely is that their full devotion to
you can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob
Israel's
to talk you through all this.
Endless right to just commit all these crimes is just obscure as whatever political harm they might be experiencing as a result from it. And thank you, Professor Shaminator, for the 2 months of Prime. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. The president never really does run things. But I do think to an extent, like if Biden said, no, we're cutting off arms, then they could cut off arms. But he fully just believes in Israel's right to just do whatever it wants. That's just ultimately what it comes down to. And I think on a certain level, believes that it's going to be like politically harmful to ever like try to restrain them in any way. But I think ultimately he's like, as he said a number of times throughout his career, he's a devoted Zionist, and he believes that Israel should just have whatever it wants. And again, when we talk about like the relationship between Israel and the United States, I think we should listen to what people like Hassan Nasrallah say about it, who have a very clear-eyed understanding of what this relationship is. He'd say he'd have his head blown off pretty quick if he did that. Well, I just don't know. I don't know. Like we've talked about before, Reagan, like in the 80s, where it was able to cut them off when they were occupying Lebanon in the 80s. And there are factions of the U.S. military industrial complex or the security state or whatever it is that I think probably do think that things have gone too far. Like I think he would have support if he did this, but he doesn't believe in restraining them in any way. Yeah, the U.S. is 1,000% complicit in this. Is Bibi making the day-to-day plans? Sure, but Joe Biden is funding the genocide. He's equally as guilty as Netanyahu. Yeah, it could stop at any time. Seems more accurate to say that the Israelis can start shit that the Americans feel they have to back up to keep the Israelis as a cooperative, super heavily armed ally, whether it's their exact preference or not. What are they going to do? Suddenly back Iran? Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah, I think that's a good analysis. Even if it does go too far, it's like they don't have any choice. And regardless, there's no indication whatsoever in terms of like the Biden administration that they have gone too far at all, except a few like furrowed brows and a few stern finger wags. Now that's all what it's been done. They're still sending billions of dollars worth of weapons. Yeah, I don't really think I need to watch the rest of this double down news thing. I think we've watched enough analysis for kind of like, I think the stuff that Electronic Intifada did, pretty comprehensive. How is the U.S. giving them absolutely everything they want incompatible with believing that Israel's calling the shots? I don't think it's incompatible, but I think it's like Pelicans is saying, like it's in their best interest to keep Israel as a cooperative ally, and going against them in any way damages their hegemony over this region. If they create some kind of adversarial situation with Israel, it damages their ability to exert their hegemony in this region and control Iran. And you can look at the Saudis are another example. Like this isn't just about Israel. Like look at the Saudis over the last decade in Yemen, like who are doing genocide in Yemen against the Houthis in this war against the Houthis. It was a lot of the same stuff like we've been talking about for years. The war crimes and the brutality and criminality that Saudi Arabia was perpetrating on the people of Yemen, and you could make the same case. You could say the same thing. Oh, it looks like Saudi Arabia is really calling the shots in the U.S., and nothing that the U.S. says really like influences their ability to like wage this conflict. The U.S. continues arming them, continues giving them the intelligence to do it. You could make the exact same case, but ultimately it's in the U.S.'s best interest to keep Saudi Arabia as a strong ally and to keep Israel as a strong ally. Even when you might say, like, oh, they're going too far. Very different time in the 80s with Reagan, not possible today. Israel gets unlimited weapons because they're a necessary outpost in West Asia. Contradictions are turning with more transparency. Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Like it's the transparency aspect. Like we're seeing that contradiction more laid bare than ever because we have access to this this nonstop stream of information of the consequences of it. And the more we see of it, the less and less sense it seems to make. But there's a twisted logic to it. Yeah, they're keeping their rabid dog happy because it's useful. And like Pelicans is saying, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? They're going to back Iran? No, they're not going to. And there's enough people in this foreign policy establishment that fully do support every single thing that Israel does. And I think Joe Biden is one of these people. And there's even more people there's another faction that fully wants more conflict with Iran. I don't think the Americans really wanted that shit in Yemen either, but they'd rather starve 100,000 citizens with their blockade than lose even an iota of influence over Saudi Arabia. Also, and this is all what it comes down to as well, irate lump, the continuous weapons shipments keep the domestic military-industrial complex humming along. The hogs are eating well. Right, that's what it comes down to as well. It might be a little uncouth, but we're still a lot of these like blank checks that they're giving to the Israeli government. They're not just giving money to Israel; they're giving money to the Western weapons manufacturers and weapons contractors. A lot of this aid to Israel is only allowed to be spent on Western weapons. These Western military contractors. Long downturn started in the 70s, and now you've had decades and decades of that surplus populations expanding along with mass death. 80% comes right back to Raytheon and Boeing. Yeah, that's as simple as you can make it, right? There's no you don't have to go into any kind of conspiratorial angle or anything like that to explain that. It might be a little going a little too far, but ultimately it's the same thing that America's always doing, just operating the money printing machine in Washington D.C. and just funneling it right to these weapons contracts. That's the whole purpose of the country in the first place. Having a rough time these days, just want to hang for a minute with some like-minded folks. Well, thanks for stopping by, Kill Panic. Although changing the numbers in the right computers, right? That's right. They simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account. And that's the simplest possible explanation that you need.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Pelicans, thanks for the gifted sub. Relic says, I think the U.S.-Israel relationship is more a dialectic relationship, constantly reinforcing each other. The U.S. sends money and weapons, then Israel uses said money to influence U.S. policy, etc. I don't agree that Israel is just a puppet state. They also influence the U.S. The U.S. is, though, obviously the more powerful of the two and has way more leverage over Israel than the other way. Yeah, there's a weird dynamic about that where they're sending aid to Israel and Israel's using that money, funding Mossad basically, and then Mossad's using that money to operate pro-Israel troll farms that influence public perception and funding the Israeli government helping fund AIPAC and all these lobbying arms as well. But that the U.S. wouldn't allow that though if that wasn't corresponding to their own values and goals. They allow themselves to be influenced. If they were being influenced in a direction that they thought was harmful to them or their geopolitical aims or geostrategic aims, they wouldn't allow that. Some useful reading for today. I mean, you can just go through, you can open up any page and it's just filled with bangers. I thought reading just the opening to the chapter on violence would be useful for today. This is the first time I've seen Rib with a book. I read a lot of books, okay? I read a lot of books. The analysis is not just US-Israel. We can desegregate into material relations and ideological apparatuses. Those work dialectically, but the imperial core is the core. Yeah, that's why I think it's useful to talk about like the relationship with other kind of colonial outposts as well. And not just focus on this specific relationship. And you make it Gen Z, the Rizzlers of Ohio. To translate, do a Gen Z translation. Like the new translation of capital, but you can do a Gen Z translation. I agree with Justin Potter. There's no sky between U.S. and Israel policy or objectives. They're the same thing. I mean, you that's the only analysis you can really come to, right? When you see the endless support. Yeah, on violence. National liberation, national reawakening, restoration of the nation to the people or commonwealth, whatever the name used, whatever the latest expression, decolonization is always a violent event. At whatever level we study it, individual encounters, a change of name for a sports club, guest list at a cocktail party, members of a police force or the board of directors of a state or private bank, decolonization is quite simply the substitution of one species of mankind by another. The substitution is unconditional, absolute, total, and seamless. We could go on to portray the rise of a new nation, the establishment of a new state, its diplomatic relations, and its economic and political orientation, but instead we've decided to describe the kind of tabula rasa which from the outset defines any decolonization. What is singularly important is that it starts from the very first day with the basic claims of the colonized. In actual fact, proof of success lies in a social fabric that has been changed inside out. This change is extraordinarily important because it is desired, clamored for, and demanded. The need for this change exists in a raw, repressed, and reckless state in the lives of consciousness of colonized men and women. But the eventuality of such a change is also experienced as a terrifying future in the consciousness of another species of men and women, the colonists. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is clearly an agenda for total disorder, but it cannot be accomplished by the wave of a magic wand, a natural cataclysm, or a gentleman's agreement. Decolonization, we know, is a historical process. In other words, it can only be understood, it can only find its significance and become self-coherent insofar as we can discern the history-making movement which gives it form and substance. Decolonization is the encounter between two congenially antagonistic forces that in fact owe their singularity to the kind of reification secreted and nurtured by the colonial situation. Their first confrontation was colored by violence, and their cohabitation, or rather the exploitation of the colonized by the colonizer, continued at the point of the bayonet and under cannon fire. The colonist and the colonized are old acquaintances, and consequently, the colonist is right when he says he knows them. It is the colonist who fabricated and continues to fabricate the colonized subject. The colonist derives his validity, his wealth, from the colonial system. I was going to try and skip ahead and skip through this and find a couple of the banger passages to get to. In its bare reality, decolonization reeks of red-hot cannonballs and bloody knives, for the last can be the first only after a murderous and decisive confrontation between the two protagonists. This determination to have the last move up to the front, to have them clamber up too quickly, say some, the famous echelons of an organized society, can only succeed by resorting to every means, including, of course, violence. You do not disorganize a society, however primitive it may be, with such an agenda if you're not determined from the very start to smash every obstacle encountered. The colonized who have made up their mind to make such an agenda into a driving force have been prepared for violence from time immemorial. As soon as they are born, it is obvious to them that their cramped world riddled with taboos can only be challenged by out-and-out violence. The colonized world is a world divided in two. The dividing line, the border, is represented by the barracks and the police stations. And remember the primary attacks, the primary, first moments of October 7th, the first people that were attacked. A really interesting quote there. In the colonies, the official legitimate agent, the spokesperson of the colonizer and the regime of oppression, is the police officer or the soldier. Capitalist societies, education, whether secular or religious, the teaching of moral reflexes handed down from father to son, the exemplary integrity of workers decorated after 50 years of loyal and faithful service, the fostering of love for harmony and wisdom, those aesthetic forms of respect for the status quo, instill in the exploited a mood of submission and inhibition which considerably eases the task of the agents of law and order. The native sector is not complementary to the European sector. The two confront each other, but not in the service of a higher unity. Governed by a purely Aristotelian logic, they follow the dictates of mutual exclusion. There is no consolation possible. One of them is superfluous. The colonist sector is a sector built to last, all stone and steel. It's a sector of lights and paved roads where the trash cans constantly overflow with strange and wonderful garbage, undreamed of leftovers. The colonist's feet can never be glimpsed except perhaps in the sea, but then you can never get close enough. They are protected by solid shoes in a sector where the streets are clean and smooth, without a pothole, without a stone. The colonist sector is a sated, sluggish sector. Its belly is permanently full of good things. The colonist sector is a white folk sector, a sector of foreigners. And I think also this whole passage is interesting in the context of Israel-Palestine, but also in the context of the West as well, and the colonized world. The colonized sector, or at least the native quarters, the shanty town, the Medina, the reservation, is a disreputable place inhabited by disreputable people. You're born anywhere, anyhow. You die anywhere from anything. A world with no space. People are piled one on top of the other, the shacks squeezed tightly together. The colonized sector is a famished sector, hungry for bread, meat, shoes, coal, and light. The colonized sector is a sector that crouches and cowers, a sector on its knees, a sector that is prostrate. The gaze that the colonized subject casts at the colonist sector is a look of lust, a look of envy, dreams of possession, every type of possession, of sitting at the colonist's table and sleeping in his bed, preferably with his wife. The colonized man is an envious man. The colonist is aware of this as he catches the furtive glance and, constantly on his guard, realizes bitterly that they want to take our place. And it's true, there's not one colonized subject who at least once a day does not dream of taking the place of this compartmentalized world. This world divided in two is inhabited by different species. The singularity of the colonial context lies in the fact that economic reality, inequality, and enormous disparities in lifestyles never managed to mask the human reality. Looking at the immediacies of the colonial context, it is clear that what divides this world is first and foremost what species, what race one belongs to. In the colonies, the economic infrastructure is also a superstructure. The cause is effect. You're rich because you're white because you're rich. This is why a Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched when it comes to addressing the colonial issue. It is not just the concept of the pre-capitalist society so effectively studied by Marx, which needs to be re-examined here. The serf is essentially different from the knight, but a reference to divine right is needed to justify this difference in status. In the colonies, the foreigner imposed himself using his cannons and machines. Despite the success of this pacification, in spite of his appropriation, the colonist always remains a foreigner. It is not the factories, the estates, or the bank account which primarily characterize the ruling class, the ruling species, and first and foremost the outsider from elsewhere, different from the indigenous population or the others. I mean, this entire everything about this chapter and everything about this book is worthwhile, but I wanted to just take some time to some of these passages. Have you ever read The Plague by Camus? It's set in a colonial town in French Algeria. His description of the town lines up with this exactly. No, I haven't, but that sounds really fascinating. And but I mean, the Battle of Algiers, I mean, I watched that shortly after October 7th as well. And, you know, that entire conflict is so you see these like mirror images like throughout all these anti-colonial struggles, and the Battle of Algiers is incredibly important to watch if you haven't watched it, like in the light of everything that's happened since October. Yeah, and the history of French colonialism in both in Algeria and Vietnam and elsewhere. I mean, it's you just see this exact dynamic replicated over and over and over. And I think that's been one frustrating thing about the last year is people refusing to kind of acknowledge this dynamic in Palestine. I do think I'm kind of getting to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. Coming up on 3 hours into the stream here, and I was late getting started as well. But I don't know. I hope this has been valuable for people. I hope the last year of coverage that I've done of this has been valuable. I know it's been really valuable for me to have this community. It's been like a really difficult year to like be paying attention to all that. And especially when you're being informed through this lens of Western media and Western discourse, you feel completely insane. And I know like having this community and having this show over the last year has been really, really valuable for me to help keep me sane.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
SS penetration. Thank you for the 2 months of Prime. That's where those weird moments on Twitch come. Are trying to be serious, and then you have to say, they acknowledge someone's name as SS penetration. But yeah, I hope it's been valuable for you folks. If you do want to support this stream, please do subscribe if you can. As you know, the only way that I'm able to keep this show on the air is through the support of the community, the chatters, the listeners, etc. Who picks that name? What a weirdo! I know. What a weirdo. Did you wish your sponsor Pootler a happy B-Day today? Is it Pootler's birthday today? I didn't realize that. I thought it was just John Cougar Mellencamp's. Yeah, so if there is anyone else that would like to support this program by subscribing, please do. You can subscribe, you can gift subs, you can gift bits, or a number of other ways that you can support this show. But every little bit helps, and I do appreciate it a lot. And I thank everyone for tuning in today and every other day. Again, it's been really valuable for me to have this community.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
The last couple of years. Joe 110, thank you for the sub. I appreciate it. I'm just looking at some candidates for a raid here. I personally mail Rob my used clothes to help support the show. I just need a few patches, deep cleaning, disinfection. It's all very helpful. I love getting these sacks of moth-ridden used clothes from Pelicans. It's always what a treat that is. What a treat. Ali in HD is looking for a gifted sub. If there's any other fine folks, that was awesome to walk into. Well, I'm glad you stopped by, Cinnamon. If there's any other fine folks that would like to support the program, support the work that I do on here, please do if you can.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Rob is a true environmentalist, only wears secondhand underwear. So that's what you got to do. We got to cut down on the waste. And thank you, Joey Stalin, for the gifted sub. We're a mere 14 subs to go to get to the goal. If I actually for this. And we're already getting weird with it after a somber day of reflection and analysis. We're already getting weird with it again. Don't ever change, chat.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Who is this here? Barbara, thank you very much for the gifted sub. I appreciate it. And now only 13 to go, chat. Very exciting. I'm actually just putting the music from this stream on my computer right now. Something I should have done probably a while ago.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all
Kijiji,
this.
thank you for gifting a sub to Toronto Raptors superstar Scotty Barnes. Thank you for that.
You can count on me.
One day he's
going
going
to
tune
good
into
old
one of
Rob
these.
to talk you through all this. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Okay, now we're getting some folks to support the show. I really appreciate it.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Savage Goon, thanks very much for the 5 gifted subs. Very, very kind of you.
You've just
Savage
become an elite member
Goon.
of the Friendship Triangle.
There we go. Savage Goon, thank you for that. Very, very kind of you. And Chaos the Gardener, thanks for the 3 gifted subs as well.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I didn't know Scotty Barnes was a triangler. Well, it's not just the triangle offense, like Phil Jackson used to run. And we do now just have 4 subs to go, chat. There's a measly 4 subs to go to get to the goal. Are there any other takers? And we have a little hype train going on. What do we think? Think we can do it? A little sports humor for you. There you go, St. Lotus. Again, like I hope this stuff has been valuable over the last year. You know, there's been plenty of people that have been doing really fantastic coverage of this. Like we talked about, like Electronic Intifada have done a fantastic job. My friend Justin Potter has done a fantastic job covering this. There's of course like Palestinians like every single day documenting at great risk of personal safety, documenting this genocide over the last year. And again, I hope it's been valuable for people. Having this little corner of the internet, having this little community. I know it's been very helpful for me. No gooning discussion today. Well, apparently I saw there was some in the Capri Sun Pappy stream. I was trying to be serious today. This is a serious day, okay? We have certainly have not been adverse to getting silly with it sometimes over the last year. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that every day has been this day of somber analysis and discussion. Was trying to be serious today.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Cool, Jay. I mean, you're right. There wasn't enough discussion of the Elon Trump thing. Again, I wanted to focus on October 7th today. But yeah, what an image. What an image. Just that whole thing, the whole video clip of him being introduced and the jumping. He's the world's most juiceless man. He's juiceless, he's sauceless, he's certainly rizless. That whole clip is just surreal. Someone said Elon looks like a vampire that's survived on rat blood for a century. It really is something else. Look at this. Look at this guy. What do you even say about this? No? Folks, we got 3 subs to go to get to the goal. A minute left in a hype train. Can we do it? In case you thought this image is like photoshopped or something, no, it's very real. He really looks like a cartoonish like henchman, like an evil scientist or something. Yes, master. Or some vampire, yeah. Look at this image. Look at this guy.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
He's like the world's most embarrassing person. Where's the video? Where's the video? We need the video.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you for talking us through all this, Rob. It really helps me not going insane. I'm incredibly glad I found you in this community. TRRS Sankara.
Pelicans, thank you for the gifted sub, and thanks Relic as well for the 28 months, and I really appreciate that. Seriously. Again, it's been really valuable for me to have this community and have this outlet over the last year, and I really do appreciate hearing that kind of stuff. That it's been of value somehow to you and to others. Where's the video of the rally? I'm trying to find it. So bad.
Come here. Take over, Eli. Just take over. Come here. Take over, Eli. Just take over.
Why does like every single thing that he does so embarrassing? I still can't find the full clip. Like, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to find the full clip?
Is the only in generations in his rocket company is the only reason we can now send America astronauts into space. Take over, Eli. All right, more.
Thanks again for tuning in, folks. I appreciate it. Rating a small streamer. I mean, I tried to find a few candidates, and I know Hassan's going to be talking about October 7th, and I think Hassan's done a lot of good coverage of this and has used this huge platform he has. In this respect, has been pretty good over the last year. And I appreciate the work that he does and the coverage that he does of this. Still one sub to go, chat. There is one sub to go. We got about 45 seconds. Is there a brave hero that wants to make the number into the good number? Someone could come at the last minute buzzer beater. It's still possible. It is still possible. Who's counting though, really? Cool J.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Cool J, for the gifted sub. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. All your comments, most of them. See you, folks.